Are there any serious wine, beer, or bourbon lovers in this class? Anybody who likes to, who enjoys, or something else, like anybody geeking out on some particular food, or thinks of themselves as like nobody likes, like, is something that they really like a pizza or some dish. Don't be afraid. No? Nobody likes to drink beer here? I can't believe that. Come on. Like, you like beer, but so okay, so do you drink different types of beers? Yes. Like what's your favorite beer? What type of beer is your favorite beer? Blue Moon. Blue Moon? So Hefeweizen is a type of beer that you like, and Blue Moon is a brand that you like. So let me ask you this: when you drink a beer, how do you decide whether it's a good beer or not? Yeah, I mean, well, so let's say you're drinking the same beer with different people, right? You're at a party, you have a pack of beer, you're just talking about the beer, people have different impressions of the beer. How do you decide, let's say you have different types of beers, how do you decide which beer is the best? I extended the question to everybody. Right, so you try them all, so you have your experience of the beer, right? And then what else might come into mind?
What other people think about the beer.
So you might be influenced by what other people think about the beer. So you share your experience. I like this one. I like, So I mean, do you talk about the quality of the beer itself? Like what kind of qualities might you talk about? Like how much hops it has in there, how much like wheat, if it's a wheat beer, You might start talking about some aromas, does it have citrusy aromas, or does it have like, floral aromas, right? And if you, so I guess like I'm a wine lover. So the example I wanted to bring was wine tasting. So how do you, it's a good example to explore this model, Immanuel Kant's model of reality, right? So whether it's beer or wine, I know a little bit more about wine, although I'm getting into beer. There's different models of how you evaluate the quality of wine. So you have some objective measures. What are some objective measures of the quality of wine? So that's a physical characteristic, right? You can measure scientifically the alcohol level of wine. So, if that's a criteria to tell you whether it's good or not, you can measure that, right? You can also taste it. You can somewhat taste it, how strong a wine is or not, right? Whether it's a light or strong wine. Although it's not, how light or strong doesn't have only to do with alcohol. It also has to do with whether it's a white or red, or whether it's the varietal, with the type of grapes that you use, right? What other objective measures of a wine? So price, right? That's a sort of like agreed upon social marker, and we tend to think that a $50 bottle of wine is probably better than a $2, like $2 chuck, right? So yes, the age. So how old it is, so really like an aged bottle might be better, so for certain varietals, like a aged Bordeaux or Cabernet, gets better with age, right? And it's more expensive because it costs money to store wine and not sell it. Right? Yes. Right. So you have all kinds of like things that you know about. So what type of grape is it? Where does it come from? So which region, right? Does it come from a terroir, from a renowned region, like a particular part of Napa Valley is like renowned? There's a particular type of Napa that's called I forget how it's called, the Rutherford bench, which is like a prized area, which has the perfect climate for growing Cabernet, so it's more expensive, when it's supposedly better. Well, you have things like wine scores. Have you heard of wine scores? Robert Parker is the guy who really sort of like came up with that. The wine advocate is what's interesting is the idea. So Robert Parker rates wines on a 100 point scale, right? And that's sort of supposedly an indicator, according to his taste, of which wines are good. So if you're above 90, usually that's a pretty good wine. If you're above 95, that's excellent wine. 100 points is like amazing. There's only one wine that's 100 points that's produced in this region, which I had recently, which is very good, but it's so it's like but you get to those, you have these classifications. How did Robert Parker come to that, by the way? Invent that system. So when he was not trained as a sommelier. Sommeliers are people who are trained into supposedly understanding wine, and he noticed that there was a clear bias in favor of French wines. French wines being considered the best, Bordeaux, and we noticed that most of the sommeliers were trained in France, and he was like, well, that's how can you trust that? So the country that trains the people who are supposed to tell you which one are the best, all of a sudden, by chance, their wines are considered the best wines. That's kind of bullshit. How do you? So his idea was like, I'm not trained formally, but I have a good nose, a good palate. I like wine. So I'm going to, without having the training, come up with my own ranking based on my taste. And I'm going to compare all of these wines against each other, and I'll rank them by a score. Right? And it turns out, incidentally, that some of his favorite wines tend to be Bordeaux wines. So he somewhat replicated the original sort of... How did the French come up with their system, by the way? Throughout history, the rich people in France were consuming wine, and they developed their own system about which region produced the best wine, which the reputation occurred that way. So anyway, so that's supposedly a sort of an objective score. It looks objective, but in fact it's based on a very subjective, on Robert Parker's taste. If you've seen documentaries about wine, and people talk today about Robert Parker is so powerful that he can make or break a winery based on his score. And so people are starting to, winemakers are starting to decipher his taste, and they make wine to Robert Parker's taste. So they know that he likes big, heavy reds, with lots of tannins, So people in regions that don't make heavy reds, they know that their wine is not going to be like as well liked by Robert Parker, so they try to change their wine to make it heavier. And that has led to a phenomenon called the Parkerization of the wine, which means that there's a loss of variety of differences across different wines that used to exist because people are trying to make Robert Parker like wine. Anyway, so a party aside, so some people lament now Robert Parker's influence, even though it started with good intentions. There's other there's the wine advocate, there's the wine spectator, there's the Wilfred Wong, there's different people who rate wine. So that's those are different scores. There are other objective things you can look at. So we talked about the alcohol level. You can look at the balance of a wine. You can look at the acidity level. Those are things you can measure. You can look at flows in the wine, chemical flows, so whether it's corked or not, whether it's oxidized. And you can do chemical tests for all of these things. So we talked about price, some chemical properties, right? The type of grape, the region it's coming from, all of those are somewhat objective, right? And scores, and now we're starting to get into, and price, right? But, does that really tell you which wine is the best? Like, you like Blue Moon, right? You said? Is that the most expensive beer out there? Not really, right? Well, so, let's go back. Maybe you guys know a little bit more about beer than wine. So, what if you really like Coors Light? Coors Light is your favorite beer, right? Right? Any Coors Light, any Coors, or what if you like Coors? Right? Or, what if you like some beer that other people don't think is really good beer, right? How can you, are you wrong? Are you wrong in what you like? No, right? I mean, so there's an irreducible subjective aspect to determining, in particular, aesthetic and moral judgments. So we're not talking about objective judgments of the truth of does an experiment work or not. But when it comes to aesthetic judgments and moral judgments, there's a lot of subjectivity that cannot be removed. You can try to add as many objective factors as you want, but you have your own particular taste, which is very idiosyncratic to you. And you see that in wine, in art, in many other human interactions. In my own experience of drinking wine, I've seen my taste. I've drank a lot of different wines. I do the comparisons. I smell and taste. I educate myself with it. And I discovered at some point that one of my favorite wines was Pinot Noir. So that particular varietal, Pinot Noir, which happens to be the varietal produced in Burgundy in France, which is one of the oldest and most revered wine regions by some people. Although you tend to have in France the Burgundy lovers and the Bordeaux lovers. So Bordeaux produces Cabernet and Merlot, which are heavy reds. Burgundy produces Pinot Noir, which is the lightest of reds, right? One of the lightest. And so, it's kind of as a preference. Do you like more light? Some people say more feminine, more fruit-forward wines, or do you like heavy, tannic, wines that go well with a barbecue? It depends on what you eat. It depends on. So I discovered that like that, right? And then as I progressed and continued to drink more of that, I realized, I like this producer, I like this producer. Somewhat it has to do with price. Eventually, so there's been studies that show that there's really virtually no correlation between price and how people's ratings of wine. So if you give blind tests to people, that's the key thing, blind testing, right? You can have, that's a fun thing. A $2 chuck, a $15 bottle of wine, a $40 bottle of wine. Have people taste them and say which one do you like best, and you will find that people don't always like the most expensive wine. Now I would say that's probably less true. The more experience somebody has with wine, the more there's going to be a correlation. So especially if you give a sommelier, they can tell which one it is. So but still, even sommeliers might not like the most expensive wine. They may say, I recognize this as this expensive prize wine, but that's not what I like. So your experience evolves through time. I find myself now getting tired of Pinot Noir and enjoying other stuff. I used to not like white wine. Now I'm starting to get into white wine. So your taste changes and evolves.